An empire built to count taxes, register land, and command continents found itself threatened by an enemy that could not be fixed in place. Rome understood walls, treaties, provinces, and the management of settled wealth. But the Huns arrived as motion itself, turning frontier management into civilizational panic. This was the moment when imperial certainty met strategic velocity, and certainty began to lose. In the 4th century AD, Eurasia was not a peaceful board awaiting a new player. It was already a strained system layered with old victories, fresh exhaustion, and structural tensions that had not yet found their final expression. Rome remained immense, administratively brilliant, and outwardly majestic. Its laws traveled farther than any king's command in Europe. Its taxation reached villages, estates, and cities with a precision envied by lesser states. Its roads, fortresses, granaries, and fortified frontiers gave the impression of permanence. But permanence in history is often only successful repetition, and successful repetition creates its own blindness. The Roman world had survived the catastrophes of the 3rd century only by becoming more bureaucratic, more militarized, and more extractive. The empire that emerged from that crucible was stronger in apparatus, but not necessarily more flexible in spirit. It could count more, regulate more, command more, and requisition more. It could dispatch officials, audit regions, move armies, and preserve imperial ritual with astonishing discipline. Yet every gain in structure risked a loss in adaptability. The machine became more impressive as the environment became less predictable. The frontier logic of late Rome revealed this tension. Security depended on fortified lines, mobile field armies, subsidies to allied peoples, and a dense choreography of threats, bargains, punishments, and rewards. Garrisons watched rivers and roads. Generals shifted elite formations toward crisis points. Diplomats negotiated with peoples who could be enemies one year and clients the next. Gold often purchased peace more efficiently than blood. This was not simple decline. It was sophisticated imperial management under pressure. But every layer of security required revenue, and every demand for revenue increased the burden on the empire's productive classes. Therefore the state's effort to preserve order could slowly erode the foundations of that order. The problem was not merely military. It was structural. Rome had built a civilization optimized for governing settled wealth, farmland, tax registers, urban nodes, legal hierarchies, grain systems, and inherited obligations. Such a civilization could absorb shocks when those shocks arrived in familiar form. Rebels could be identified. Rival emperors could be challenged. Border raiders could be punished. Provincial unrest could be categorized, measured, and addressed through established instruments. But beyond the Roman frontier, on the great Eurasian steppe, power obeyed a different logic. The steppe was not a blank void. It was a political engine. Confederations there did not depend on marble institutions, inherited ministries, or fixed capitals. They formed through charisma, victory, tribute, intimidation, marriage ties, hostage politics, and a constant redistribution of plunder. Leadership was personal rather than impersonal. Loyalty was dynamic rather than guaranteed. Prestige had to be renewed through success. Strength had to move. To sedentary empires, this could look chaotic. In reality, it was a different form of order, one better suited to speed, uncertainty, and open space. That distinction matters because the Huns did not enter history as a random horde bursting from myth. They appeared in the 370s as part of a wider pressure wave moving westward. Their arrival struck the peoples north of Rome's Danubian frontier like a strategic detonation. Goths, Alans, and others were not passive pieces waiting to be moved by stronger hands. They had their own leaders, rivalries, and ambitions. They fought, negotiated, and sought advantage with full political agency. But the Hunnic advance altered their calculations overnight. A people under pressure does not remain where a map expects it to remain. Therefore one movement triggered another, and another after that, until the Roman frontier ceased to be a clean military boundary and became something far more volatile, a zone of displaced populations, emergency decisions, and cascading fear. This was the true beginning of transformation. Refugees approached the empire not merely as supplicants, but as armed communities carrying their own elites, grievances, and expectations. Roman officials, already trapped between humanitarian necessity and strategic suspicion, made decisions with limited information and enormous consequence. Some groups were admitted across the frontier. Some were mishandled, exploited, starved, or disarmed clumsily. Some were treated as potential military assets. Others were treated as temporary burdens to be controlled. But once frontier policy became refugee policy became military crisis. Therefore the empire faced not a single invasion, but a chain reaction. The catastrophe at Adrianople in 378 did not spring from nowhere. It was the product of mismanagement under pressure, of imperial arrogance colliding with demographic reality, of a state discovering that administrative categories were no longer sufficient to control events. Rome still possessed armies. It still possessed officers, fortresses, and institutional memory. But the old assumption, that the empire could decide the terms of every border encounter, was beginning to fail. The horizon itself had become unstable. The stakes extended far beyond whether Rome could defeat one more enemy. The deeper question was whether a civilization built for management could survive an environment increasingly dominated by speed, cascading displacement, and the politics of panic. Rome's greatness had always included adaptation. The empire had reinvented itself repeatedly. Yet adaptation becomes harder when every reform strengthens the last system rather than preparing for the next one. The Huns did not create every Roman weakness. They exposed how dangerous those weaknesses had already become. By the 5th century, the Huns had evolved from destabilizing force to power brokers of continental significance. Their leaders learned a brutal lesson about empire: Rome's wealth could often be harvested more efficiently through coercive diplomacy than through permanent conquest. Occupation requires administration. Administration requires institutions. Institutions constrain movement. But tribute extracted by terror preserves mobility while delivering profit. Therefore the Huns discovered that the threat of devastation could be more strategically useful than devastation itself. This is where Attila enters history not as a cartoon of barbaric fury, but as a strategist of leverage. His genius lay not in creating a durable state in the Roman image, but in understanding exactly how the Roman system could be manipulated. He recognized divided courts, anxious emperors, competing generals, rival ministers, vulnerable provinces, and the political uses of spectacle. He understood that to appear unstoppable was to extract concessions before battle. To make negotiation feel like temporary mercy was to transform fear into revenue. Attila's power rested as much on psychological dominance as on cavalry. By this time the Roman Empire was effectively two empires, East and West, linked by memory but separated by resources, priorities, and political realities. The Eastern Empire was wealthier, more urbanized, and more fiscally resilient. It had deeper reserves, stronger administrative continuity, and a greater capacity to absorb blows. Therefore it could often pay, negotiate, delay, and rebuild. Such policies looked humiliating to moralizing chroniclers, but states do not survive on pride alone. Buying time can be strategy. Yet tribute sends a message. If an adversary learns that terror opens the treasury, then terror acquires a predictable return. Thus the East lived within a recurring dilemma: every concession preserved immediate stability while advertising exploitable vulnerability. The Western Empire faced an even harsher version of the same trap. It was poorer, more fragmented, and less able to translate imperial claims into reliable force. Provincial loyalties frayed. Court politics consumed energy that should have gone to defense. Regional elites negotiated for local survival in ways that often weakened central authority. Therefore the West increasingly relied on federate peoples and improvised coalitions, alliances with groups that were useful, armed, and not always loyal in any Roman sense. This did not mean the West had ceased to exist as an empire. It meant that Western power had become relational. It depended on bargaining among actors who remembered Rome's prestige but no longer feared Rome alone. Few men grasped these new rules better than Flavius Aetius. His significance lies not merely in battlefield competence, but in strategic literacy under conditions of imperial exhaustion. Aetius had personal familiarity with the Hunnic world. He understood that power in the 5th century could no longer be measured only by legions, standards, and official titles. It had to be measured by access to warriors, allies, legitimacy, information, and time. A general who could not assemble coalitions would command little more than a fading memory. Therefore Aetius became a manager of dangerous partnerships. Such men are often less celebrated than conquerors because their achievements are partial, contingent, and compromised. Yet partial victories are often all that history allows. Diplomacy in this age was warfare by other means, and warfare was diplomacy with casualties. Roman embassies visited Attila not as empty ceremony, but as intelligence operations wrapped in protocol. Negotiations involved tribute, hostage exchanges, fugitives, territorial claims, marriage politics, and the calibrated reading of mood and intent. Assassination plots surfaced. Courtiers schemed. Envoys observed. Every audience became a contest over appearances. Was Attila overextended or ascendant? Was he preparing for war or staging a better bargaining position? Did tribute by peace, or merely postpone a larger assault? In such conditions, certainty was impossible. States acted through fog, and fog rewards the actor most comfortable with ambiguity. Logistics reveals why this contest proved so difficult. Roman power depended on taxation, supply networks, fortified urban nodes, roads, magazines, and elite cooperation. This was a magnificent system when functioning properly. It could support sieges, sustain armies, and project authority across huge distances. But it was slow to adjust. Revenue had to be collected. Orders had to travel. Factions had to cooperate. Governors had to comply. Generals had to trust one another enough to act in concert. The Hunnic system depended on movement, intimidation, political cohesion among subordinate peoples, and a leadership capable of preserving fear and reward simultaneously. It had vulnerabilities of its own. It required momentum. It required successful leadership. It required enough plunder and prestige to keep subject or allied groups obedient. Yet in a crisis, mobility can exploit the hesitation of institutions. This was the deeper strategic dilemma facing Rome. Every concession preserved short-term stability but invited future pressure. Every act of defiance defended prestige but risked immediate devastation. No perfect choice remained. That is often the hallmark of an era in decline, not universal weakness, but the disappearance of low-cost options. The world had become too compressed, too dynamic, and too unforgiving for old assumptions. Then came the Western campaign of 451, and with it the confrontation that posterity would mythologize as if history had arranged a final duel between civilization and barbarism. Reality was far harsher and more interesting. Gaul mattered not simply because it was territory to be defended, but because it was a theater where prestige, alliance politics, tribute logic, and the future of the Western Empire converged. If Attila could dominate Gaul, he would not merely seize land. He would demonstrate that no coalition in the West could prevent his will from becoming political fact. Therefore every city, every aristocratic house, every allied ruler, and every uncertain subordinate watched this campaign as a referendum on power itself. Attila's advance brought opportunity, but also risk. His confederation was formidable precisely because it concentrated many peoples under one coercive leadership. But confederations of fear and profit are strongest in motion. They are least stable when campaigns drag on, supplies tighten, spoils disappoint, or subject groups begin to question the inevitability of victory. Therefore Attila needed momentum not only for military purposes, but for political maintenance. The aura of invincibility was part of the machinery. If that aura cracked, subordinate loyalties could begin to loosen. Aetius understood this. He also understood an uncomfortable truth: the Western Empire could not defeat Attila through Roman strength alone. The age of purely Roman solutions had passed. Therefore Aetius executed his masterstroke, not the command of a single homogeneous army, but the assembly of a coalition from men and peoples who distrusted one another almost as much as they feared the Huns. Romans, Visigoths, Alans, and others gathered not because a higher unity had been achieved, but because necessity can produce temporary reason. This is one of history's recurring ironies. Great coalitions are often born not from shared ideals, but from converging fears. The Battle of the Catalonian Plains emerged from this convergence. Ancient sources cloud the event with exaggeration, moral drama, and numerical fantasy. Chroniclers liked apocalyptic scale. They preferred moral theater to strategic precision. But the essential analytical point is clearer than the legends. This was a collision of systems. On one side stood Attila's power of motion, intimidation, and accumulated prestige. On the other stood a desperate alliance trying to prove that inevitability could be resisted. The issue was not simply who would kill more men or hold more ground by sunset. The issue was whether Attila's reputation for unstoppable force could survive a serious check. If reputations are political weapons, then breaking a reputation can alter the strategic landscape even when the enemy survives. Accounts differ over the battle's course, the role of terrain, and the exact sequence of command decisions. Such uncertainty is not a flaw in historical inquiry. It is a reminder that those living through events rarely possess the clear narrative later ages demand. Leaders made choices with fragments, rumors, and urgency. That is the permanent condition of war. What matters is that Attila was checked, not annihilated. The coalition held. The Hunnic advance in Gaul did not become a final Western collapse. But victory carried its own exposure. Rome had survived through alliance, not restored predominance through independent strength. This is why the Catalonian Plains must not be misread as a clean triumph. It was proof that the Huns could be resisted. But it was also proof that the Western Empire had become dependent on forces beyond its old monopoly of organized violence. Success therefore revealed weakness even as it prevented disaster. Such contradictions define late empires. They still win battles. They still issue commands. They still preserve ceremony and law. But each victory discloses how much the terms of power have changed. Nor did 451 solve the strategic crisis. In 452, Attila invaded Italy. This fact alone should caution against simplistic narratives. A tactical or operational check does not automatically resolve the deeper balance of power. Attila remained dangerous after Gaul. The machinery of fear, extortion, and mobile war had not vanished because one coalition had slowed it. Italy itself, heartland of Roman memory and imperial symbolism, faced menace not because the Huns could permanently administer the peninsula, but because they could still impose political terror upon it. The message was chilling: even when checked, coercive power can still dictate the agenda. Yet the Hunnic system contained within itself the seeds of rapid collapse. This too is one of history's sternest lessons. Systems built on fear, charisma, and redistribution can expand with astonishing speed. But expansion is not the same as institutionalization. Attila's confederation was formidable because it concentrated obedience around victorious leadership and the flow of tribute. But heavily personal systems face a brutal succession problem. When the commanding figure disappears, unresolved rivalries no longer remain suppressed by awe. They surface all at once. After Attila's death in 453, fracture came swiftly. Successors contested authority. Subject peoples recognized opportunity. Revolt spread. The cohesion that fear had created could not automatically survive the absence of the man who embodied that fear. Therefore the Hunnic confederation unraveled with remarkable speed. This did not mean Hunnic power had been illusory. Quite the opposite. It had been devastatingly real. But it was a form of power poorly translated into durable institutions. Fear can unify rapidly. It cannot always govern permanently. Here lies the larger significance. The Huns did not single-handedly destroy the Western Roman Empire. Historical seriousness requires resistance to such theatrical simplifications. Rome's troubles were older, deeper, and more internal than any single external threat. But the Huns accelerated everything. They intensified migration. They magnified reliance on federate military forces. They destabilized old frontier balances. They encouraged emergency politics, coercive taxation, military improvisation, and elite fragmentation. Therefore they acted not as a sole cause, but as a brutal catalyst in a system already primed for transformation. Europe after the Huns was not a Hunnic Europe. That is the deepest paradox of the story. Their empire dissolved, but the world they helped create endured. Peoples had moved. Roman authority had contracted. New kingdoms emerged where imperial administration had once claimed exclusive legitimacy. The old Roman monopoly on organized violence weakened irreversibly. Political authority became more regional, more negotiated, more militarized, and more contingent. The map did not simply break apart. It was rewired. In that rewiring lies the birth of a different Europe. This transformation carries a psychological lesson of enduring importance. Settled wealth often mistakes infrastructure for resilience. Roads, granaries, tax systems, fortresses, archives, and laws create immense capacity. They are among civilization's greatest achievements. But systems optimized for administration can become vulnerable to adversaries optimized for adaptation. A state may know how to govern millions and still struggle to respond to a fast-moving cascade it did not anticipate. Efficiency within a known pattern is not the same as flexibility under novel pressure. Rome was not foolish. Its officials were often intelligent, disciplined, and hardworking. Its generals were not uniformly incompetent. Its emperors were not all decadent caricatures. But complex systems can fail strategically while still functioning impressively at lower levels. That is what makes imperial decline so difficult to recognize from inside. The machine continues to operate. Taxes are still collected. Offices are still filled. Orders are still issued. Victories still occur. Therefore many assume that the old logic remains intact. Then suddenly, the underlying environment has changed so profoundly that competence itself begins serving a fading world. The verdict, then, is not that Attila conquered Rome in any final sense. He did not. Nor is the verdict that Roman civilization simply collapsed before barbarian fury. Such language flatters myth more than history. The true strategic outcome is harsher. The Huns exposed and accelerated a transformation already underway. An imperial order built for regulated dominance found itself confronting a geopolitical age of mobility, coercive diplomacy, cascading migration, and fractured legitimacy. Rome could still resist. It could still negotiate. It could still sometimes win. But it could no longer define the terms of every contest. That loss of initiative was the real wound. The cost was counted in devastated provinces, displaced peoples, swollen tribute, emergency alliances, and the slow corrosion of imperial confidence. The West survived Attila only briefly. Aetius, the great broker of survival, was murdered in 454. The Western imperial office disappeared in 476. These dates should not be read as neat endings, but as milestones in a long political unmaking. The world did not end. It changed patrons, changed languages of legitimacy, changed centers of military gravity, and changed the architecture of power. Yet something profound had vanished, the assumption that one empire could organize the entire Western Mediterranean and continental frontier according to its own administrative reason. The modern mirror is difficult to ignore. Great systems still believe that scale guarantees security. Wealthy states still trust that bureaucracy, finance, and technical sophistication can absorb any shock. Institutions still prepare for the last crisis more efficiently than for the next one. Migration still triggers political panic when strategic foresight fails. Rivals still discover that intimidation, ambiguity, and psychological leverage can extract more than open conquest. The instruments have changed. Human nature has not. Power continues to belong not merely to the strongest structure, but to the actor who best understands the tempo of change. The Hunnic episode reveals an old and unsettling truth about human societies. People often build order as if the world will honor the categories in which that order was designed. But history does not respect categories. It rewards adaptation, punishes complacency, and turns neglected peripheries into centers of decision with astonishing speed. Civilizations fall into danger not only when enemies become stronger, but when assumptions become slower than events. That is the real terror of the horizon, not that something unknown exists beyond it, but that it is already moving. And the legacy question remains, perhaps the most difficult question empire can ever face. When a civilization's systems still function, its elites still speak the language of stability, and its symbols still command reverence, how can that civilization recognize that the age which made those systems powerful has already passed? If this analysis sharpened the way these events are understood, subscribe for long-form historical strategy that treats the past not as costume drama, but as a laboratory of power. And for the next step, continue with the video appearing on the end screen, because this story becomes even clearer when placed beside another turning point in imperial history. One direct question remains, was Rome's greatest weakness military exhaustion, political fragmentation, or the inability to adapt fast enough to a changing world?